is consumer protection law. So it's not referring to consumer protection law. So what we mean by the consumer law in the consumer law revolution is pretty much different efforts to bring legal services to the average consumer. And those can be technology-driven efforts, or they don't have to be. So, pretty much before I want to introduce our speaker today, Jay Mandel, who's actually one of the consumer law revolutionaries, a leader in the consumer law revolution. I want to give you a completely incomplete history of consumer law, and I think if we wanted, and I think that might be an interesting project for one of the students to provide a more complete picture of the history of consumer law. But if we wanted to go back to the beginnings, probably ever since the profession has existed, there were probably good-hearted lawyers who wanted to make their services available to clients at affordable prices. And in fact, it's built into our ethics rules that we have to provide a certain amount of pro bono legal services to clients. We should also, if we provide a more complete picture, we should probably also talk about, different efforts, different institutions that are providing legal services at affordable prices or for free to consumers. We would have to mention the Legal Services Corporation, which was created 40 years ago in 1974 by Congress, that provides, has actually from 2013 had $350 million in funding to provide legal aid services to people who can't afford those services. We probably also have to mention the Public Defender's Office that was actually created in the 1960s by Professor Babcock, who's an emerita professor now from this law school. We should probably also mention the consumer rights advocates, the various innocence projects like Santa Clara Law School's Innocence Project, unions that are providing legal services to their members, and law school clinics like our amazing clinics here, and so on and so forth. Right? The problem with those initiatives is that they're notoriously underfunded. Even if the $350 million for Legal Services Corporation, that's not enough for providing legal services to those who can't afford them. And they typically serve in only specific legal scenarios for which those organizations may have funding. And they only serve to those who really can't pay anything, right? But there's still a very large amount of people out there who are middle-class folks and small businesses who cannot afford legal services under the existing paradigm, right? Billable hours and so on and so forth. And so that group has a tremendous amount of legal needs, but those needs are not met. And so there's been a group of very savvy, smart entrepreneurs who see a huge opportunity in tapping into this, what is known as the latent demand for legal services. And there are different numbers floating out there, but so some numbers that I've seen are, that's a $45 billion opportunity in the U.S. The latent demand for legal services. So now back to my completely incomplete history of efforts of trying to tap into that latent demand for legal services. So the first person who comes to my mind is this guy here. Anyone knows who that is? Except for Professor Genesereth. So this is Joel Hyatt. So Joel Hyatt started Hyatt Legal Services in the late 1970s, and he started in Ohio. And his idea was to build a chain of discount law offices, to bring some legal services to Main Street America. And I want to show you. I want to show you a little ad for Hyatt Legal Services. So I think it's this right here.
His office was just across from the State House, and he took all comers, big and small. His fees were so low, they alarmed his fellow lawyers. And on top of that, Abraham Lincoln advertised, for the same reason Hyatt Legal Services does today, to bring the law closer to people. Lincoln always told you his fee up front, and we do that today. Hyatt Legal Services, a good idea that just keeps getting better. I'm Joel Hyatt, and you have my word on it.
All right. So that gives you, I think that's a good sense of how we wanted to kind of, get, to the people, to this latent demand for legal services. I show you a little bit earlier ad too, just.
A lot of accident claims never get a fair hearing because many people think you have to be rich to have a lawyer. But it can cost you plenty to settle your own claim, and you don't have to. At Hyatt Legal Services, we took the fear out of legal fees. Before you sign something you don't understand, come in and talk to one of our lawyers. We'll help you fight for what you're entitled to. I'm Joel Hyatt, and you have my word on it. We took the fear out of legal fees across the country and in your neighborhood.
So we took the fear out of legal fees, and I think that's sort of a theme that we still have going on in today's consumer law revolution, and Jay will kind of enlighten us about this in just a little bit. So back to Joel Hyatt, just briefly. So he also is sometime into building this kind of discount law offices chain. He had a brilliant idea. He said, why don't we start legal plans, like an insurance product for people, who face a legal situation, and they don't have to, also taking out the fear of legal fees, right? You have insurance, you don't have to fear the legal fees. And so he came up with Hyatt Legal Plans, which is actually a product that's still quite popular. It's actually sold to corporations, so it's that their clients are corporations who provide that as a benefit to their employees. And that company was sold for a lot of money to MetLife in, I think, the late 1990s. And Joel, at that point, has retired from the world of legal services. And anyways, just well, let me jump, just back to Joel quickly. So he then teamed up with that guy, who we all know invented the internet, and he started a media company called Current TV, which last year was sold to Al Jazeera, which created a little bit of criticism, but yeah, and also, anyways, it's a little bit of a digression. But back to legal plans. So there's another company called Legal Shield that sort of picked up that idea of legal plans, but that's serving sort of end consumers who can purchase these legal plans. And I don't know who of you was able to go to Professor Rhodey's talk. She mentioned she mentioned that legal plans really have never really taken off in this country. I mean, that's a very successful business, but they haven't taken off in this country like in other countries. Like in Germany, for instance, almost every family has a legal plan. Okay, so now let's fast forward to the early 2000s, and we have LegalZoom. LegalZoom was created in 2001. Sorry, the slide is a little bit messed up here, but legal document company that also provides access to lawyers. Today, it's really the biggest player in the consumer-facing legal services space at this point. I also, around the same time, Direct Law was started by Richard Brannett, who's actually coming to this class on May 1st. He's a real innovator in the space. He's also a co-chair of the e-lawyering task force of the ABA. I'm not sure that direct law can be viewed as a consumer-facing legal services effort because it's more like, I think his focus is more on enabling lawyers and law firms, with like forms and tools and so on, which ultimately can benefit consumers and make those services more affordable. But his focus is not really on the end consumer. 2008, Rocket Lawyer was started. We learned a lot more about Rocket Lawyer today, I assume. Then we have, at the same time, Quality Solicitors. Sorry, this slide is cut off here. Quality Solicitors was started in the UK, and that's a company that a lot of legal tech entrepreneurs in this country have paid a lot of attention to. It's kind of a franchise model in the UK of like law firm, I think 400 law firms or so that carry the Quality Solicitor brand. They share infrastructure, and they. What the hell is that?
You're getting a chat.
Probably the other laptop.
Like G-chat or something.
No, maybe the Apple one.
Yeah, this turn is mute.
Yeah, well, but I wanted to, before I do that, I wanted to show you one of the solicitors ad, because that's also interesting. So they made a deal in 2011 with a retail company, WH, they're called WH something, which is like a bookstore in England, to have WH Smith, yeah, to have legal advice booths in those stores, and they've thought they would get more kind of distribution like that in a sense. Similar, actually, go back to Joel Hyatt. He had a partnership with H&R Block, which is a big company in the tax accounting space. So anyway, so here's like an ad for Quality Solicitors. Oh, sorry.
Aye, cheese, the legal stuff, breakfast cereals and bleaching products.
Well, I want some advice on my divorce.
Oh, divorce, good, we can help you with that. A lot of people say that it's a crazy idea to get your legal advice the same place you get your spring onions. But don't you worry about that. You feel completely comfortable getting detailed and important legal advice over the phone from a supermarket, don't you?
Well, I was a bit...
Good. Now, divorce. I had a terrible separation once. From a potato. We were going to be in a soap together. Things didn't work out. She eventually ran off with a sausage from aisle 13. I was completely cut up. Not literally, of course.
Yeah, actually, I think I might go to my local solicitors on the high street.
You what? Why would you want to do that? Why on earth would you want to sit down with someone for personal advice, face to face, from a pleasant and understanding professional?
Yeah, I think I will do that, actually.
Oh, come on. I'll do you a deal, 2 for 1. Buy one, get one free.
2 divorces for the price of 1? You're an idiot.
Oh, please yourself. Anything else I can help you with? We got a special offer this week on crushed
No
walnuts.
thanks.
Oh, anything else? Pickled aubergine porridge?
Bye.
No pleasing some people.
Not from a supermarket, the emphasis here. So clearly, they, in their name, quality solicitors and lawyers on high street, they want to very, proactively avoid any, kind of associations with kind of like, low quality legal services, and they kind of proactively try to address that in their ads, and edgy ads. Here's one that's a little bit more straight.
My first advice was absolutely free. I wasn't expecting that. And I wasn't expecting this.
Man, who would expect that?
Yeah.
Quality Solicitors, changing the way you see lawyers.
Get some of those buttons.
Right. Yeah. So that's Quality Solicitors in the UK, and they have now more recently kind of announced a closer collaboration with LegalZoom in the US. So they're kind of refocusing on providing legal services online, sort of away from that kind of retail outlet, which is an interesting development. So, yeah. Anyways, you can see sort of what's on consumers' minds, when you see how they kind of try to address those fears about, maybe a low quality legal services. So anyway, so then let's go, to like, what I think has become, like, what's kind of driving that sense in the community that there's a revolution going on in this consumer law space. So I think since 2009, between 2009 and now, that all these kind of different companies came up with a focus on providing legal services at affordable prices to end consumers. Law Pivot is one, started by Jay, and then Legal Force is an interesting one, started out as Trademarkia. I will learn more about that one too. Logis, Fair Document, Priori Legal, WeWars, Law Dingo, Up Counsel, and I'm sure there's a few that I missed. But there's like a tremendous amount of these new kind of platforms, and trying to serve the latent demand for legal services and tap into that opportunity. So so that's my, again, very incomplete history of sort of consumer law efforts. And so with that, I'll probably just turn it over to Jay. So just like quick introduction. So Jay is a big lawyer turned legal tech entrepreneur and executive. He currently heads the legal advice business at Rocket Lawyer. He, as I mentioned, he's a co-founder of Law Pivot. He was co-founder and CEO. Law Pivot was funded by Google Ventures, and he was before joining, or before starting his company, he was an M&A lawyer at Apple, right? You were an M&A lawyer, and before that he was a big law lawyer at Proback and at Pillsbury, and so he brings this kind of big law and in-house perspective, and he's become a legal tech entrepreneur. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you.
And we'll have Kartik and Brian will be our commentators today. So great, over to you.
Just set up right there.
Yeah.
Great. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Genesereth and Professor Vogl for inviting me to speak in front of you today. We've had a long association with the Codex Group, and they've been great supporters of the legal technology companies that myself and a lot of my fellow co-founders of other companies have been involved in. So what I'm going to do is I want to keep this open-ended. I want to make sure that we have a lot of interaction. So just a quick background, a quick story. So I used to play football in high school. And what we used to do, I was a wide receiver, we used to script the first 15 plays before the game. And so likewise, here, I've scripted the first 15 slides and the first 15 sections to keep it open-ended. Now it so happens there was one incident in high school where in the second session I actually got knocked down and suffered short-term retrograde memory loss. So the quarterback was looking at me, I was looking at the quarterback. I don't know exactly what the play is. So I'm hoping I don't trip over one of you guys and have the same sort of memory loss and forget exactly what I'm going to say to you. But bear with me if that ever does happen. So kind of working right into it, what I'd like to do with you is, again, keep it open-ended, ask questions, and I love the interaction, and it's great to be back on campus again. So I'd like to actually start off with actually asking some questions of you and things I'd like to address. So for me, how did this consumer law revolution come about? What are some legal issues that impede this revolution? How do we build products to address this latent demand for legal services that Professor Vogl is talking about? And what is the future of legal services? Why and how should all of you participate in this revolution? So jumping right into it, I want to talk first of all about the evolution of the consumer law revolution. And I think Professor Vogl actually spent a lot of good time actually laying the groundwork for exactly what has been happening over the course of the past 5-6 years. So when we talk about the market, now this is kind of like a VC pitch. And I've done this slide so many times that it's ingrained in my memory. But the pitch is usually that the legal services industry is a $300 billion market. Now the question mark is, what segment of that market is addressable by us? And so the number that was pointed out by Professor Vogl is 40 million. The number I ran with was 100 billion. So therefore, it's a wide array. But the bottom line is it's a huge market and something that's been untapped and something that gets a lot of VCs excited more recently and a lot of angel investors really excited about. Now talking about what exactly is the pitch? And I'm taking this right from my pitch deck. The same pitch I've done over and over again. And if you really distill what really the problem is in the legal services industry, is if you take one side, on the individuals in SMB, the costs are high and they're unpredictable, to the point where a lot of consumers and small businesses never approach a lawyer. On the other side, for lawyers, it's difficult to connect with clients. Now, if you're a big law firm, then maybe it's a little easier, but it's still hard there. But if you're a solo practitioner or a small or medium-sized law firm practitioner, it's difficult to actually get in front of your client and get that person to interact with and pay your bills. So therefore, this is something that, that resonates. What's really funny is that when I give this pitch, as soon as I say this, high and unpredictable legal costs, all investors nod their head. Automatically. So I got it right there. In terms of what are we talking about here? Who are the people that we're really servicing here? So we're talking about the customers as individuals. Now if you take just the adult age population of the US, that's 240 million individuals in the US. So if you look at various surveys, the way that you primarily interact with lawyers is through referrals. That's commonly the way that you interact with lawyers and find lawyers. And then, oftentimes, the legal services are altogether avoided because you'd rather, do anything you can to avoid talking to a lawyer or picking up that phone and talking to a lawyer and having that billable hour start clicking away at $250 or $300 an hour. So that's the way that individuals look at it. Now, this is the area where we're also focusing on in Rocket Lawyer, but generally is something that people don't think about. We're also attacking the small business market. Now, if you look at small businesses, there are 27 million small businesses in the US. It so happens that 22 million of those are sole proprietors. Now, we did a survey actually of small businesses to ask them the same question. Do you interact with a lawyer? How do you interact with a lawyer? We found out that 48% of them actually avoided talking to a lawyer. Now, these are small businesses, mom and pop shops, people trying to put up a living, and they have basically no protection between them and their creditors. I mean, imagine how vulnerable you are without an incorporation or some basic formation of some corporate entity. But 48% of the folks avoided actually incorporating or interacting with a lawyer. So really, when we think about it, I like to call it not just the consumer revolution, it's kind of the prosumer revolution of interacting with small businesses and also with consumers. So what exactly do people want? Like, what do you really want? When you interact with a lawyer, all you really want is to have simple and affordable and on-demand legal services. That's all we ask, right? It's a simple question. You can get this from other areas, right? If you want to get a video, simple, affordable, and on-demand, you go to Netflix, right? If you want to get music, you go to Pandora. But why can't we do this in the professional services space? And that's the challenge that we've all been trying to attack. And this happens to be the mantra that I have at Law Pivot, and also the mantra we have over at Rocket Lawyer. So I want to take you back, and I just wanted to kind of get a survey of the audience. So how many of you actually are computer science students here? Okay, we have a couple. And then the rest of you are law students, I'm guessing? Okay, so I want to take you back as to why exactly this is the time. Why now? The question that oftentimes comes up when we pitch is that, okay, great idea, great market, but why now? Why are you the right solution? And so I want to take you back a couple of steps as to what exactly precipitated this revolution that we're talking about in the consumer space. So this is actually a quote from Jeff Bezos about how much stuff there, if you just take a look at it, it says, there's so much stuff that has yet to be invented. There's so much new that's going to happen. People don't have any idea how impactful the internet is going to be, and that this is still day one in such a big way. So this is actually a quote that Bezos actually had initially when he started the company, but it's still the same quote he has in his corporate offices today. Because the idea is the internet is fundamentally revolutionizing his space, let alone all the other spaces that are associated when it comes to professional goods. what I like to basically propose to you is this revolution of the internet is something that we're very familiar with, is when you think of commodity goods, the internet has basically revolutionized the way we get a lot of commodity goods, the things we purchase online on Amazon or any other, be it diapers.com or whatever other internet site that you go to. And now we've come to the point where actually we're using the internet for specialty goods, going to eBay for a specific type of product that you want. So that's been what's transgressed in terms of the revolution in terms of the internet and what you can buy on the internet. Now there is an underlying sort of revolution behind that that is in the area of services. So now we're talking about commodity services that we're delivering online. Like now you go to places like TaskRabbit, if you're familiar with that company, and get commoditized services to get house cleaning. You go to various sites that give you specific types of services. Now those are commodity. Now what I'd like to propose to you is that we've actually now also transpired into the area of customized services. And this is the area where I think the revolution lies. This is where the internet that we think is really ripe for innovation. Now when we talk about services, what are we really talking about? We're talking about medical services, we're talking about accounting services, and we're talking about legal services. If you're familiar with the medical space, they're actually a little farther ahead than the legal space. There's companies like HealthTap, like WebMD, where you're actually going to consulting and trying to figure out exactly what your medical ailment is online. And there's some telepresence software too that allows you to interact with a doctor. In the same way, accounting has also come along in financial services. But I'd like to say that in the legal space, we're currently still in the very nascent stages of figuring out how to provide customized services using the internet. And that's why this consumer revolution is very exciting. Now, it happens to be fraught with a lot of issues, as you've read in the various articles that were strapped a little bit by state bar, various statutes and so on and so forth. That makes it a little bit tougher. And I'd argue the reason why we're actually behind the other professional services spaces when it comes to actually delivering those services via the internet. But let's talk a little bit more about that later. So I want to talk through a few key terms. And actually, when I started Law Pivot, there weren't too many books. Actually, the fact that there's so many articles about this space is surprising to me. Because when I started this in 2009, you just didn't find articles about talking about this. You heard about Hyatt Legal, like Professor Vogl was talking about, and a few others, but people didn't really spend a lot of time writing about this space. But now we've come to the point where there have been writers early on that talked about what exactly the future would be, and actually Richard Susskind. How many people are familiar with Richard Susskind? So Richard Susskind actually wrote a book, The Future of Law, in 1996, that talked about what exactly would happen 20 years down the line when it came to the law. And he started to unravel and start to define some terms that are more commonly used in the parlance in some of the articles you read today. But one thing he talked about, and one thing that I read back in 2009 when we started the company, is this idea of commoditized services, that what we're going to be able to do is standardize the legal tasks that are replicable and packaging these tasks for quick, efficient, and low-cost delivery. So that's a very key term of thinking about when you think about how we deliver legal services online. The second term that is actually interesting too is this idea of unbundled legal services. When you think about interacting with a lawyer, you usually think about getting the full caboodle. You get basically all the way from the engagement agreement to the initial conversation to the contract drafting to the negotiation to the advocacy. But the idea of unbundled legal services is the idea of taking each part of that, segmenting it, and delivering only that part. So that all of a sudden, you have the ability to pay for the advocacy, to pay for the document, to pay for the legal advice from the lawyer. And this actually is a very fundamental point that drives actually a lot of the companies, because the list of companies that Professor Vogl mentioned actually are all unbundled legal services, talking about each piece of the legal representation. And so when we think about it, I just listed the ways you can actually break down. And if you're taking notes and want to start a company, then you can see that these are actually different companies that can create it in each of these areas. When it comes to transactions, there's the due diligence, the legal research, the transaction management, template selection, negotiation, so on and so forth. When it comes to litigation, there's the doc review, the legal research, the project management, litigation support, and all the companies that you'll get a chance to speak with over the course of the semester are actually talking about different parts of this unbundled legal service. So moving on to, any questions, by the way, before we keep moving? All right, great. All right, so now let's talk about the companies. Now, I like to split them up into three categories. So we got the documents, the document assembly companies, we have the branded networks, and we have the lawyer matching and Q&A companies that are out there. So what are we talking about? So I won't spend too much time talking about these companies, but if we look at the document companies, the ones that are the most prominent nowadays happen to be LegalZoom and Rocket Lawyer in terms of the pure volume of contracts that they're creating on a day-to-day basis. And if you think about it, if you don't understand, the scope of what we're talking about here is in the order of millions of visits to these sites on a monthly basis. So these are very valuable properties that are out there. And there are also some real up-and-coming properties like Shake and Docracy and Paperlex, Law Help and Legify. And the whole idea that we're talking about here is that but for these websites, those consumers would have never interacted with a lawyer. When you think about how you interact, if you talk to your aunt, you talk to your mother, you talk to your daughter if you have a daughter. If you have a daughter, I imagine she's quite young, but nevertheless. If you do talk to them, how are they finding lawyers nowadays? Google, Bing. And who's ending up at the very top of these search results? It's these companies. That's how people are actually interacting with the law and figuring out how to do documents nowadays. So these are companies, and the company Shake has a great mobile app in terms of the way to interact and create documents mobily. Docracy has been pretty innovative on the UX side. Paperlex, Fair Document, Law Help, Legify. DocStock has been around for quite some time now as part of QuickBooks. So these are all really, promising companies that are coming up, providing document assembly, such that you basically are able to enter into their website and they customize it. This is not like the first reading that we had talked about. I think it was a 2009 paper, and there were companies that were mentioned there that actually no longer are on this list right now because it's evolved so much. And those companies basically were providing standardized forms that you would buy. Nowadays, you go on these sites and you actually go through and they're customized. They ask you specific questions and they fill out the documents for you. So in 15 minutes, you have a customized document. Now, talking about the next category of companies, branded networks and lawyer matching Q&A. So this is the category which is a lot broader. And so what is the idea of branded networks? And so what has happened is that some of these companies that are listed here essentially have gotten enough funding to be able to say, you lawyer, basically join us as part of our network and be, let's just say, an Vogl lawyer. And we have a certain reputation in the market. Certain people are searching for us on the web. And therefore, we will start to build your credentials on our platform by providing users details about your profile, how much education you have, the questions that you've answered on our site, the actual articles that you write on our site. And it's so interesting. Vogl actually raised about 35 mil, actually, just recently. So, I mean, you're talking about companies that are really valued. And just to step back, just a case, when we think about the scope of exactly how interesting this space has been, now the people who are funding these companies that are here and on the past screen are venture capital funds like Google Ventures, August Capital, Bessemer. These are top flight VCs who are interested in this space. Kleiner Perkins invested in LegalZoom. So this has gotten a lot of interest in the venture capital community because of the market and because I think the scope and the opportunity here. But again, back to the branded networks. The idea is basically you join up into the Vogl network. You basically are part of a network of X hundred or X thousands of attorneys, and it's a platform for you to market yourself. And in the same way, Law Dingo, Prior Legal, Rocket Lawyer, we're in the same camp. Just thinking about Rocket Lawyer because I have direct experience. We have a network of 500 lawyers nationwide. And so those lawyers do not work for Rocket Lawyer. They're actually lawyers in their jurisdictions, but they've agreed to certain terms and conditions to provide services to our members at a discounted rate. And so they have the Rocket Lawyer brand. And that's something that they use as a means to develop their online reputation, but more importantly, to get leads, to be able to get out there. So you can imagine yourself, sorry.
If someone's a Rocket Lawyer, can they also sign up to be an Vogl lawyer and counsel and all the different ones?
Absolutely. In fact, it's very interesting. If you look at the most active social media lawyers, they happen to be on all the major sites. And so you'll see them, if you type in a lawyer that's pretty active, you'll see their Vogl profile, you'll see their Rocket Lawyer profile, you'll see their Law Dingo profile, their counsel profile. So therefore, a lot of savvy lawyers coming out are actually signing up for all, because they're trying to figure out the ROI of all these various sites. And you know, and if you think about it, like your generation of lawyers that are coming out, that for you, actually interacting on the web and finding clients on the web and building reputation, like you do on LinkedIn, like you do on Facebook, like you do on other sites, is a very natural thing. And so this is just basically extending that into your professional sphere and building that reputation. So that's your question. So that's one part. The other part is lawyer matching. So there are certain sites like Law Dingo is an example of this. I think UpCounsel may be also an example of this, where they're also taking in information from customers. So therefore someone comes on board and says, I have some query about getting a bankruptcy attorney in California because my small startup has gone under, my mobile startup has gone under. I need an attorney. And these sites basically find you the right lawyer, and they make the connection between you and that lawyer. So they cut out that whole difficult task of trying to find the right lawyer to service you for your needs. And then the last part is Q&A, and that happens to be more my expertise. So we're in there. So Q&A, a lot of the lawyer networks, a fundamental part of the product is the idea that you can interact with them and ask them questions online. Oftentimes, like if you go online, what are you really doing? You're asking a question, right? You're not trying to find a lawyer. You don't know if you need a bankruptcy. This is a very sophisticated audience, but you don't know you need a bankruptcy lawyer or a corporate securities attorney. You're actually going in there to ask a specific question. And so you go to these sites to actually figure out, oh, okay, I want to ask this question. And these branded network of attorneys respond back. To give you an example, at least of the Law Pivot company. So Law Pivot was a company I started before Rocket, where we were branded as basically the Quora for legal. Are you guys familiar with Quora?
Yeah.
Okay, so Quora is basically a more public-facing Q&A on everything in technology. So the difference that we said essentially was that instead of being public, we'll make sure that you have a confidential interaction. Instead of having anyone answer the question, we'll have licensed attorneys in your state answer that question. So therefore, we have an algorithm sending you to the right attorney. And instead of not making money like Quora, we'll make money. And the idea was basically a customer asks a question, do they pay a fee? So, but that's something, that's a Law Pivot model. And a lot of these other sites have actually replicated or been there even before us, of actually doing Q&A and having people interact and ask questions on the sites. So that gives you a flavor of the different types of companies in the space. Now it just so happens, I put branded networks and lawyer matching and Q&A all in one space because a lot of these companies do all of them at the same time. That just happens to be the case. So now let's talk a little bit, and this is where I wanted to get your feedback here. So go ahead, please.
Sorry, I have a question on the previous slide.
Yeah.
Do you guys track who exactly uses your services? So I'm curious if you actually have data to indicate that the people who use, let's say, Rocket Lawyer are actually consumers, or is this other lawyers who, because I can imagine if I was a lawyer and someone asked me for a bankruptcy attorney, using this service, tracking someone down and referring them, do you have data on like who exactly uses your services?
Yeah, absolutely. So the interesting part of this, this is actually great. We were having a great conversation over lunch about this. That at the end of the day, these are legal technology companies, but these are really big data companies. Because if I look at just our network, we have thousands of questions coming in on a weekly basis. We know exactly what types of queries people have in what jurisdiction and what practice area. And so for us, the idea is that we basically are using that data to figure out more intelligently how to route the question to the right attorney. Does that answer your question?
Well, I'm curious, like on the front end, like who goes to your site? Do you have any data on that? The person interacting, is that actually a consumer, or are we talking about just another way of lawyers using services?
So a lot of these companies use this idea of progressive flow in their design. The idea of progressive flow is, in web design, your idea is to make it simple, but not too simple. The idea is to basically allow a user to give you information initially. And the one thing that we figured out very quickly is the best way to get information from a user is to have them ask their question. Once they ask their question, it's surprising how many of those people convert because they're vested. The next step in the process is to start getting a little more detail. So you'll see in our flow, we ask you about practice area, we have to ask if you're a business or if you're a consumer. So we have that level of data. But the fine line you have to push is you can't ask for too much information because it doesn't lead to conversions. Another way a lot of these companies do this is they use SEO, so you know where the traffic's coming from. But SEM is a very powerful method as well. For those of you who are not familiar with SEM, that's basically search engine marketing. It's a term. AdWords is the product in Google, and in Bing they have their equivalent too. But the idea is you can basically bid for certain types of keywords. So we, for example, could bid for bankruptcy, and we know exactly that all the traffic that came in regarding bankruptcy. So we know that from the traffic. Plus, they identify themselves as being a business question. They may have a specific query that it's a practice area of not only bankruptcy, but it's regarding starting a business. So we collect a lot of data in the funnel before we start to assign them to the right attorneys to answer the question. Is that understand? Great. So moving on to, this is where I want to kind of start picking everyone's brain on. So the idea here is you've seen it. So document assembly, there's branded networks, there's lawyer matching, and there's Q&A. So there's clearly, and as I mentioned before, our industry is different than a lot of other industries. Actually, medical has regulations, but it's different than the other professional services industries in that we have a lot of things we have to navigate. When we actually create products, we have to think about all these issues here and figure out how to navigate all of them to build a product that's going to basically meet legal muster. So to give you kind of a funny anecdote, so the California Lawyer magazine actually wrote a really nice article about us, 4 pages. 4 pages about our terms and conditions. The California Lawyer magazine decided to talk about our terms and conditions for 4 pages. What other industry do you have that's actually talking about your terms and conditions and not talking about your company? But that's the kind of challenge that we have in the legal industry, that people are really focused on what exactly is your privacy policy, what exactly is your idea about referral fees, and so on and so forth. So they take so the legal industry has a very, very keen eye on making sure that we're compliant. And so that also is a bit of friction when it comes to actually building our companies and scaling our companies. So you're familiar with the 4 issues that are commonly cited: on authorized practice of law, ethical concerns, fee splitting, privacy. There's one I omitted here on purpose, but what is the other major issue that, there's actually maybe more than one. Guesses? Advertising. Advertising. That's another one that's actually a very common issue, and there's a lot of state bar ethics opinions on the area of advertising. So, what I'd like to do is, I can definitely spit them out, but if you could tell me, like, someone could take document assembly and just tell me what are some of the issues, these 4 or others, that really come up when we talk about document assembly. And go ahead.
I think one big issue with document assembly is that since customization will always be a little bit limited, not exactly tailored to a particular customer's needs all the time, it opens up the potential of malpractice suits, making sure document itself is legally enforced and legally valid, and that sort.
That's great. That's great. Anything to add on? That's great. Anything else about document assembly?
Sometimes the document, when you go, for example, to government page, it's in the end of an explanation for a reason, right? You're supposed to read the explanation before and then read the form and understand it, for example, how to fill it, to understand how to fill it. If you do a direct link or you assemble it in one place, you can skip over this information that is sometimes more needed and you won't be able to access that.
Great. Yeah, that's in the user flow. Any others?
I think trust issues.
Yep.
From the consumer standpoint, they don't trust online forums to give all their personal information and have it there all the time.
Absolutely, privacy is a huge issue. You have another
I
point?
think there's issues with unauthorized practice of law, assuming it's not completely automated, and maybe there's a lawyer that's also assisting with it, answering questions, whether or not they're practicing the right jurisdiction, or whether they're actually representing the person trying to generate the document as their attorney, and whether there's actually an attorney-client relationship. Those kind of issues.
Right. That hits on ethical concerns and unauthorized practice of law. So there are a lot of document assembly has a lot of issues, and there's a lot of litigation. LegalZoom has been subject to litigation on the areas of unauthorized practice of law. So definitely. So let's talk about branded networks. The idea of having a network of attorneys. What issues do you see with that?
One question regarding the document assembly.
Sure.
Is there also litigation regarding the result of the document assembly?
I'm not aware of recent litigation. What oftentimes happens in a lot of these cases is they actually get settled.
Is there insurance?
Sorry?
Legal suit, because they use insurance on...
I don't know. I'm not sure. But the idea, it's really interesting because it was mentioned in the ratings you read that oftentimes there's a lot of settlements on these matters because they don't want to set that precedent for themselves and also for future companies. So LegalZoom and ourselves are obviously competitors, but they faced
the same
issues. So branded networks, the idea of having attorney networks, 500 attorneys, whatever the case may be. What are some of the issues that you face in branded networks, and the idea of holding yourself out with attorneys that could provide legal advice?
Well, if one of them says something that's incorrect, it affects you.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah.
Also the question of how much information is shared within that network, and so if too much information is shared or if everyone's working together too much, it makes it seem like the network sort of becomes its own firm.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see that causing issues.
Yeah, it's acting like a. I mean, there's some companies that there's the separation you pointed out rightly, the arm's length relationship between ourselves and the attorney, because we can't actually be associated with that law firm. They can't be funded by us per se.
Let's just start moving away from strict directory type networks, and it starts to become more like advertisements. Different jurisdictions have different ways that attorneys can put themselves out there. So just advertising.
Absolutely, advertising. There are a lot of advertising issues, and there are certain states that we noted, I think Nevada and Florida in particular, and if you read, are ones that are very strict about attorney advertising. Sure.
The biggest problem is that how to maintain the quality of the legal services, and how you can assure that the lawyers are competent enough, or how to maintain that quality of the issues. I mean, I have a question regarding that, and what kind of effort or solutions are you taking in order to maintain the quality? And I think it also relates to the business model, and how do you incentivize the lawyer to provide a candid Q&A or services?
Absolutely. So in terms of ensuring quality, so it's interesting, in the case of Rocket Lawyer, if you were to join as a part of our branded network, you must maintain, there's a kind of an SLA, a service level agreement. You have to do certain things for our members in order to be part of our branded network at Rocket Lawyer. So that relationship, if they're not fulfilling their commitment of the minimal level of quality that we expect of our attorneys, then they will no longer be part of our network. So that's the way that it's a push and take. So therefore, that network doesn't always, it remains dynamic. We add attorneys to them, but we also remove attorneys to maintain that level. In terms of incentives, that's a very, very good question. Like, how do you incentivize attorneys to be part of a Rocket Lawyer network, a LegalZoom, a Law Dingo, whatever the company may be? And it's interesting because we've applied a lot of different methods for that. But one thing that's very interesting is you use the ideas of gamification, if you're familiar with that in other areas, of actually incentivizing attorneys by giving them credit for the things that they provided. Like actually profiling on their putting on their profile that they've been X%, the top X% in terms of providing services in this particular field, or giving them additional sort of benefits for the result as a result of their Q&A. Other things that we've also done is that just building necessarily their online reputation. A lot of young attorneys who come out of law school have no way to prove that they're the best startup attorney in Tampa Bay, or whatever the state, or whatever the jurisdiction. So they basically start to build their reputation online and start answering a lot of questions. And all of a sudden, they start to rise at the top of the rankings of any branded network like ours or others.
On a related question, talk about an algorithm to match, I suppose, questions that are asked to lawyers with that particular expertise. Does the algorithm also help with quality assurance by, say, matching lawyers with higher reputation to particularly valued customers, or somehow using the reputation in other ways to help match?
Yeah, so that's the one thing. That was at Law Pivot, now at Rocket Lawyer, that was one part of our secret sauce, the algorithm, to figure out who exactly we should route the questions to. And that's elements of kind of predictive learning. You know, and it's definitely, it's a low-level algorithm right now, but the idea of getting more and more sophisticated algorithms to make sure that the right attorney with the right values actually answer your question is going to be something that's going to continue to be an innovation in this field. We did it with our engineers were actually trained a little bit in the area of algorithms and machine learning, but we had a great conversation actually over lunch about this, that over time, if you think about the future of law, that you eventually would automatically, when you have a question and we have details about you online, we would have to route you immediately to the right attorney who's the right one to answer your question. So we still have a ways to go. All of these companies do, but eventually we want to get there. Sorry, you have a question?
One thing I'd worry about with the branded networks is I think most people in the public understand there's some like attorney-client privacy they get. But they show up to Rocket Lawyer, they post on the thing, I've got this question, and they might think I can offer this up in total confidence and the statements I'm giving can't be used against me because it's going to be attorney-client privilege or something, but it gets a little murky because it's not clear that Rocket Lawyer is the attorney or how far their privilege would extend. Does that make sense?
Exactly. That's the whole idea of the ethical concerns. And so you touched on something for Q&A. The idea of attorney-client confidentiality, attorney-client privilege, all of these issues are things that actually are the area we have to tread very lightly on. There's a lot of case law, state bar ethics opinions about if you are giving information in the public, then you have to state it's legal information and not legal advice. And so that's the things we have to tread and think through very carefully in our terms and conditions as to how do we do that and how do we represent that to our users too. Because you have to be very clear on your website and also in all the interactions you have as to is this legal advice, is this legal information. So that's definitely something that makes it challenging in developing some of these products. So I'm going to jump, actually, we're getting close to the, sorry.
Who's carrying the malpractice insurance? Is it, it's the attorney?
The attorneys. The way that we like to think about it is if you think of any network like Rocket Lawyer or LegalZoom or anything that's kind of akin to being the basically the platform on which interactions happen. And so therefore, it's the attorney that's carrying the malpractice insurance. So turning to, and that's actually a necessary part of our also making sure they're part of our network. You have to have malpractice insurance.
So does Rocket Lawyer have any liability?
I mean, through the terms and conditions, we make sure that all the interactions that happen between them are between the lawyer and the user, but if it's the fault of us because of our technology.
You gave me a crappy lawyer.
So that's where it's also tricky to build those terms and conditions to protect the consumer and make it clear who's the one who's giving, because we're not providing legal service, it's the lawyer.
Now you're working on algorithm that, for example, I ask HR agreements, and then you know that I need another term also. So you collect information from me, which you can analyze, so you can give me proactive advice on what I also need.
Now you're talking about the future, which is great. The future is where we can take that data. Again, these are very much data companies because we are not there yet where these companies are not at the point where they're actually predicting your next moves yet.
Okay. You have the information.
But you have the information, and so that's the evolution of a lot of these companies, of figuring out what do you need in the future. Now we do that in Rocket Lawyer because we know dates that you've given us and things that we expect for you to happen. But to make it very customized, that makes it an even more exciting product.
Yeah, but this is then information or advice.
Yeah, so that's the other murky ground. What are we talking about? Because you have to figure out how to communicate that.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, these all lead to some of the interesting issues on the right board. So I think what I'll do is maybe, lawyer matching and Q&A, we'll kind of lump those together, but any issues so we're getting close to the turn of the hour. Any other issues that you see in lawyer matching and Q&A? Sure.
Well, for lawyer matching, is there ever like bias towards what the lawyers are matched to the consumer if they pay you more or like have like a premium account with you guys? Do they get a preference?
Yeah, so Vogl is not in the lawyer matching space as much, but however, there are companies which specifically ask for information about yourself, and then they sell leads to basically lawyers. Okay. There are a few companies on the board that are like that, and so there's obviously they're dealing with a few issues of obviously lead splitting and referrals. Of what are they taking as a result of that, and then they're referring specific attorneys. So that's also a murky ground, which is very clear in lawyer matching. Yeah.
Do they specifically confirm with the bar that they're actually an approved lawyer? Like if they go and check with the bar? Or?
Are you talking about all these companies?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting. An interesting point that's actually brought up the ratings too, is that lawyers, it'd be wise for them to go with the more reputed companies because they have higher standards of ensuring that these lawyers are actually bar certified. So if we have attorneys on our network, that's part of our requirements coming in. You gotta be bar certified. But a lot of younger companies that come in, what they do, and you might have seen this, is that as soon as you graduate from law school, your profile will be scraped up by some small startup. And you'll see your profile on that startup. Because the idea is they want to build basically a population of lawyers and start to show that they have some momentum. And if they refer attorneys, they're not as, I guess, diligent about making sure that they are certified. So that's kind of a practical recommendation for attorneys to make sure you go with the branded network because they'll do the extra work to make sure that they recommend attorneys that are certified.
That's a basic question. I'm sorry, I just don't know the answer to this. Do you have law firms having their lawyers participate in these networks so that they get their own business, but they're also getting business for their attorneys through Rocket Lawyer?
We do. That's what makes this interesting too, because this, it starts to get to the point, and this talks a little about the future, that this is not just for sole practitioners. There are mid-sized firms that are actually on our network. And a common phenomenon that I saw when I was in-house at Apple is that there would be a number of lawyers who were previously big law attorneys like myself who would jump out and have 3-person or 4-person practices of very experienced attorneys. And those people have difficulty finding leads. So we have some of those mid-sized firms, 3, 4, 5 attorneys, actually join the network to build their reputation. So it's actually, if you think you're going down the big law path, this is actually something you should seriously consider because this may be something that builds your reputation once you jump off and start your firm or just start down a path with a mid-sized firm. Does that answer? Okay, sorry, one last comment. Go ahead.
And on the other side, I'm just
Yeah.
wondering the sort of proportion between, I guess, individual customers using Market Lawyer and, say, companies or small, mid-sized companies that, I guess, suppose subscribe to a $3 a month subscription rate and sort of have a virtual in-house counsel.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it just so happens because of the populations I mentioned, the 240 million consumers versus the 27 million businesses in the U.S., the vast majority of your traffic is consumers. It just so happens that small businesses are the ones who are more committed to you because they have more legal needs and they have a longer life cycle. They have to make sure they're incorporated, they have to make sure they're complying with HR issues, so on and so forth. But that's just a proportion of the population. So I think we'll stop there. So I think you're getting a sense of some of the business models that we're talking about here, and I'll talk about it very briefly. But the business models are basically pay for leads, you pay per question, you have attorneys that basically are paying subscriptions to be profiled at the top of these lawyer directories. You have subscription-based services which we push, that if a user actually comes on our platform, asks a question, or enters into a document, we ask them to be part of a monthly subscription. We provide them a 7-day free trial. So there are various business models that a lot of companies are experimenting that are along these lines. Sorry.
So the subscription is for attorneys or for consumers?
For consumers.
And so what do they get by that? Is it sort of like a legal plan?
They get access basically to documents they never want.
Oh, the documents, okay.
They do.
Not the service.
And access to lawyers who can provide them answers.
So that's a little bit like legal insurance then.
It is. It's not legal insurance, but it's the idea of providing legal protection. Because insurance is subject to certain other regulations.
Okay.
But it is. So,
yeah.
So I think you can see here that subscription-based models is what we believe in, and that's the model we've used. But we also use pay by document too, and pay by Q&A. So therefore, there's a lot of room for experimentation here as to how do you make money. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to be profitable as businesses.
How do you stop someone like Shake from undercutting you? Like, say if they start to do, like, they're thinking about offering more premium kind of contracts.
Yeah.
They could potentially do it for maybe cheaper. What do you do to avoid that kind of like rush to the bottom in terms of pricing of the documents?
So I think that's the last question I'll take before the hour. But this is interesting because at the end of the day, a lot of companies come on board and provide. This is not just in the legal services space, but a lot of companies in the internet provide either services for free or for lower than their competition. And so the thing is that I think the killer app for us on the document side is workflow. We have to have better workflow, a better user experience, more value than what they provide. That's one of the things that we got to provide. So if they have a much better killer UX and a killer experience, and they provide it for cheaper, well, we got it better. So anyway, so I'll let you guys, I think it was a 5 minutes? Or-
Yeah, let's take a 5 minutes break. Just break. Let's meet again at 10 after 3-ish.
Staying busy, just not without any obstacles. The reading, instead of reading in the library, reading outside.
That's an upgrade.
Yeah, that's an upgrade. Couldn't do that.
People will start to
I think one
Good.
thing.
We're like, yeah,
I have my work career.
okay, so if I'm looking.
I was thinking of the undergrad that was submitted on Monday, the first draft. And also the first draft when you did the class.
I think so. Yeah, we get to review and rewrite them.
Yeah, so yeah, the graduates don't have that. Graduates just submit longer one.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't have a graduate on that.
It's too bad. The office hours are actually
Yeah, I think
So I work with
too many students. So take it down to allow more students to be there. Without overflowing the PAs, instead of using people graduates and only PAs.
I think so.
And I have to submit another chapter, third chapter, dissertation on Monday.
But even the settled ones are.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. They take settled.
Yeah.
And they need a patent that's someone
No, it's do you know what to do with the project?
stated it is something that's really hard to know. There are some.
I'm enjoying
There actually is. I'm in,
I think once you take issue, one
Oh,
of the clouds, there's login question.
Yeah, that's definitely a very nice. It's going to be rich. It's probably a lot of issues.
Yeah.
It's
pretty nice.
Other than that, it's more the small of
I'm trying to do something.
I think they're basically the same. The problem. They're all doing constitution.
It's very sophisticated.
Yes. The log is pretty much a little more out
It
there.
ends up being the company.
There is
Unlike big firms that create their own cloud, small firms can also, right? And then what? When you use Dropbox, you ask your article story tells you that that's a big problem. Right. So when you have, you can create your own servers, you hire your own personnel. That's something that big firms can do.
Right, but
Yeah.
I even if it didn't switch, and that's why how you stand
Just tell.
create something, whatever, you, it's not really gonna help you.
And I think
Yeah,
We are focusing mainly on management.
Public for now.
Right.
How have you guys been? 6 months? Pretty good. Pretty good.
So you guys are thinking about it?
Yeah.
So this is like perfectly like in line with that. I was like just reading trying to find things where research activities. So here, full Venn diagram action. Anybody else?
I narrowed down to two that I'm interested in. And contact the companies directly to get a lot more information and try to figure out. It's kind of where I'm standing right now. The case next one and the trademark legal portion. Both of those seem like interesting things that I could work on, and ones that where I could probably be a little bit more knowledge because I know seeing this rather than some of the other ones which would require much more legal knowledge and diversity.
Sure. Yeah, that seemed to be like the dichotomy. Pretty cool though.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff would you be doing? I didn't read those.
Yeah, it does.
What kind of stuff would you be doing at trademark case studies?
There's a relationship between
So what are you doing?
So they're kind of trying to see, is there a situation there and you kind of just be doing research into that. And the other one is more of a machine learning kind of deal, which once again I feel like I need inspiration just because I feel like they were very in terms of what they expected and what they wanted to live it up to. That's a piece, right? But I also feel like they could feel more lost, which is why I was trying to reach out to them.
I think. Yeah.
I'm really confused.
I feel like it's the kind of thing where more guidance would be really beneficial. Well, it depends on what kind of work you're doing.
It's smaller than everything I'm used to saying. Here's your assignment, go do it, right? Now I'm just kind of like, I feel like the only other time I felt like this, I was taking an art class for like the first time in my life. And then like, you make it, that's it. And I was just like, what did I do? Anything you want, you can do whatever you want. Whatever I want. They gave me back to the class, and it was like, what is going on? I said I could do whatever I wanted.
The same place.
And they were like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. But then you need to think about this. Couldn't you have told me that earlier?
Yeah. Give me some parameters to work with. Wow. Wow. I think you should mark so, I know hires are just using that so they can get requests from people and then figure out what it is and categorize it. I don't know that one case texting. I think the trademark is definitely interesting because that's a pretty obvious correlation.
And that's why I thought, it's something that's like, it's a little bit of CS, it's a little bit of like, stock market analysis, like that could be very interesting to work on.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Actually email them because I've been still trying to like figure out a little bit more about these things that if they do, actually want to talk about some questions yeah. I was like, fix up my background a little bit so that when I do email them, I don't, seem completely incompetent.
Just want to be able to ask like 2 or 3 educated questions. Yeah.
Come off pseudo smart.
I hear that. What do you know what it is?
Right, and there is.
You're more
and yeah, and that's how there's always that.
Well, yeah. After the podcast,
You just don't want to lose something like inadvertently, then you
Oh yeah. Well, the law school, the way papers work is you have normally a couple weeks after finals, and just submit my final paper. It's pretty strange.
Yeah. What is going on?
Yeah, yeah. They love to give you the ability to totally switch yourself out of like a spring break. My buddy did that. All he did was spring break. He like, it was great during finals because he only had 3 finals, but the rest was like 4. But then his spring break was like a big break. It's just like, yeah.
It's the other all of them just frankly everywhere. Well, we don't agree on finals because turn it into finals and you're done. And then it's like, yeah, a couple weeks after the finals and you're still not extended into
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna treat it just like basically just like a final project that's due at finals week.
Yeah.
So I think that's
But you can just like present your work together and set up final presentation.
yeah, I think slide decks sounds pretty good.
So I'm just going to say, it's really cool to see if I could potentially build something that I could do.
That is unique.
Yeah, and to get that's invested having someone else that needs to live or work and then one person let me just, I just need more information. Since I'm not after on Tuesday. Yeah, but even this guy, you need to say you want this by this day. I think it's just pretty much letting them know what you're doing. I think you're set.
Yeah, I think that's the vibe I got. Is like, sure, I'll be able to roll in every day. I'll be like, hey, I'm doing this. Cool, cool. Yeah, well, they said, I'm curious. What is your area? Says, like, it's outrageous. So that's my last name.
Right. I was just gonna ask that. I was like, any connection?
I think we're ready to get started. Okay, so now we're going to kind of get into the nuts and bolts of actually building products. So there are 2 or 3 computer science students here. So you might be more familiar with this side than the rest of the students. But the thing that I had to do with the transformation of my career was that I was a lawyer for 9 years, slaving over details, crossing T's, dotting I's, negotiating. And when I jumped out, I had to step out and basically manage a team of engineers, which was actually very daunting, but also very exciting. And understanding the parlance of what exactly it takes to build a technology, what it takes in terms of design, what it takes in terms of not only just the actual art aspect of design, the UX design, the UX flows, the actual front-end engineering, the back-end engineering, and all this on an internet platform. So thinking about that, I wanted to give you kind of a quick background of the pros and cons of actually building these platforms. And some of you may already know some of this, but some of you may not. So starting off with what is the pro of actually building an internet solution? So a few things are, one, if you build something online, you have the ability to scale that solution. The whole idea of not providing just one-to-one consultative services between you and the client, but you can go one-to-many. That same solution you provide can be given to thousands and millions without the ability of actually any incremental cost. The other idea is that you have the idea to replace commoditized tasks. So that the idea of, again, there are thousands, if not millions of people who actually want to create wills in the US. So therefore, through technology, you can basically allow that same will to be replicated and done many times over. Create standardized flows. And this goes back to the discussion we were having earlier of one of the killer apps here is basically the idea of a simplified workflow. That when a user comes onto your platform, you are not actually an attorney interacting directly with the customer. It's the actual interface that's interacting with you. So therefore, creating the flows that actually make sense, that are intuitive. And there's this idea called usability testing, that as we develop these flows and interact, we take groups of 3-4 people and say, you know what, we have a task for you. Figure out how to create a document on Rocket Layer. That's a task. And we basically watch every step of what that person does, the questions they ask, the places where they get stuck. And we have other tasks we ask. But then we figure out what exactly is the best flow to get someone through a platform where you're not interacting with them at all. They're interacting with the interface. And the idea, again, the pro of building on the internet is the idea of unbundled services, is that we can basically separate out all the elements of the interaction. We talked about, you know, the ways that a lawyer interacts with a client. They first engage them in an engagement agreement. They have the initial conversation with them. They create a document for them. They advocate. They maybe go to court. Whatever the case may be, all these things we can actually unbundle and create specific products that apply to that solution and make it scalable, make it a standardized workflow, and make it commoditized. And the idea for us, the killer app that we think is going to be the one that wins out, is the idea of creating the simplest workflow. Who creates the simplest workflow so that you and millions of other people can come on the site, get their solution done, find value in it, pay us for it, and move on? And that's something that's a challenge, I think, for a lot of companies. And we put a lot of effort. You know, at the end of the day, when you think about Rocket Lawyer, you think about any one of these other companies, LegalZoom, Hub Counsel, we're really SaaS companies. We're software as a service companies, first and foremost. And then secondly, we happen to be in the legal space because that's our customer base. Are there any other kind of pros you guys think we missed here in terms of building on the internet? It's a pretty list.
Well, I think you're missing mobile.
Yeah, great. That's a great addition. Yeah, the idea of actually allowing you to, a stat about this, and Morgan Stanley is commonly cited about this, but they say in 2015 that mobile usage, if you interact with the web, they think that 50% of interactions will actually be through a mobile device. 50%. So therefore, and there are various statistics about this, and they're very, I mean, you know, we have statistics, we know exactly how many people use mobile at our company. But the idea is you have to be ready for different form factors. You have to be ready for the form factor of a mobile, you have to be ready for the form factor of a tablet, and you have to be ready for a desktop. And down the line, heck, we don't know what the form factors may be. The form factor in the future may be Google Glass, or maybe augmented reality. You know, these are all things that we're contemplating in the future, but you've got to be able to work in all these mediums.
You also, one of the advantages is also that you don't need like physical infrastructure. I mean, like you don't need all.
Exactly.
That I think goes in that scalable.
Yep.
One thing you miss is the networking.
The network effects.
Yep.
Yep. Network effects of sharing knowledge. Yep. Any other pros of the internet?
I think personalized service. The user feels that he is interacting with somebody who is knowledgeable, takes step by step. I think the standardized flows is somewhere where to do that.
Yeah.
I think consumers at different income levels can also like choose the experience that they want a little bit better. So you have a potential to reach a lot of different people who aren't already getting legal services.
So price segmentation, ability to interact with different customers for sure.
It's just sort of really similar to the answer, but just the ubiquity of technology these days and being able to create a product that's flexible just because it's more technology based and you don't have physical infrastructure to worry about. You can more tailor it to the changes and the trends in the market. Along with that, you can going along with scalable solutions, you can reach out to a lot greater market.
Yeah, these are all great points. Sorry,
I was wondering if the data you have, if you ever use it, and if any companies you know will price discriminate based on the like proprietary information they get about that particular, not necessarily the workflow. So if you get certain types of information, maybe you can extract more value. Like if there's more value add, then you charge a higher price for it.
That's really a point. You know, actually, I mean, that's not something that we've really contemplated, but I think it's something that could happen if you know maybe some companies could go by different states. And I think some of the legal matching companies have done this. That if you want to find a lawyer in Chicago as opposed to finding a lawyer in X city in the Midwest, they're going to charge more for that attorney in Chicago. So, I mean, in a way, if you think about lawyers, they do price segment too. So on top of the technology, there's an additional layer of price segmentation that you could face. Yeah.
But I think maybe building on that, and some of the data you have, you were talking earlier about how you have data on these are questions that people in this region often ask, and you probably know these are the people we pair them with, that's how much those people charge.
Yeah.
You could imagine not having a standard fee and just like when a user shows up, maybe you encourage them to load in like a LinkedIn or a Facebook profile, boom, you have more info to price discriminate. Once they ask a certain type of question, maybe the question based on other data you have links to private information, and you start to, just based on the question and maybe a social media profile, build out a price.
Yeah, that's
Is that
actually
happening?
I'm not aware of that happening in any of the sites that I've taken a look at. The closest thing I've seen this is Just Answer actually allows the user to basically price what they have this idea of low, medium, high level of speed, and low, medium, high level of actually, I think it's quality. And so therefore, based on whatever you choose, they actually allow the user to price discriminate and say, I want something very fast, I want something very detailed. But I haven't seen any products that actually do that level more recently. Yeah.
Just speaking a little bit towards unbundled services, do you guys ever, maybe like based on prior requests, recommend services for a certain, like, so I imagine a small business owner might have a patent question, right? And so they ask that, and so, you know, you might, so they ask a few of those in a row, you might say, oh, like, you know, is this another, is it like a sort of fast track, or like, oh, have you considered other forms of IP, like maybe trademark or like trade secrets or anything? Is it ever recommended?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very much, and that turns to actually the idea of the end-to-end service, of not only providing the initial interaction, but in our case, we're a subscription-based service, so we have a great incentive to recommend the next services that they take a look at. And so that's where data really helps out, where we can predict that maybe you have this particular issue, maybe you want to do that. Now the thing is that a lot of companies like ourselves and others have to get more intelligent down the line to figure out what do we recommend. Just like if you take a look at Amazon, and you look at some of their early sort of algorithm work, you get some really bad results if you rented a particular video. They would give you an assortment of different videos that would completely didn't make sense. But it became intelligent over time. They started to get more and more data and start to do that. And we're still in the nascent stages of doing that.
Sure, I was just thinking like, someone mentioned earlier that really good way of putting it, the virtual in-house department. You know, so if you're a small business or a medium-sized business and have that subscription, it's like, oh, like is this another of like X issue you've been having once a week for the past 6 weeks? I just think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I think that's the direction we'd like to be in. And I think that's where we turn to, and it's a great segue, I think, into the next slide that I'll walk into. So thanks for bringing that up. But the last thing about the pros of building building on the internet are that again, everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And so Einstein happened to say this quote, but it applies to design. Because if you actually go through a flow and put a little bit of information in and get your information automatically, then the user oftentimes thinks that really there wasn't much work in providing that answer and they value that less. So you have to make it simple, but not so simple that it seems like it's not really valuable. So that's the kind of fine balance also in the design. And some of the questions you were asking about, how much information are you getting and how much what is the extent of the data that you're getting, so that they can get through the flow but not think that it's not as valuable. So moving on to the cons of building on the internet. And so I think the comment before was the idea of the end-to-end experience, the idea of actually addressing all our needs not only now and in the future. But I think some of the issues that are the cons actually apply a lot to, unfortunately they apply to the regulations that we're subject to in the legal industry. The ideas of privacy. So there's a lot of laws out there about privacy and making sure that there's a level of like the attorney-client confidentiality, the privilege. These things are basically protected between an attorney and a user if there's interaction between them. But what happens when they actually go on the internet and they're on another platform? That's a little murky ground. The idea of ethical concerns. You guys brought up a ton of issues on ethical concerns when we talked about Q&A and about legal matching. These are things that we got to navigate. I mean, we're not just technologists at our companies. We're also legal experts and trying to figure out how to create the right product that jumps through the right hoops. Uncertainty of how the laws will apply. We had a great conversation just actually during the break about how unauthorized practice of law is interpreted in so many different ways because there's 50 different jurisdictions. And none of them can really agree on what exactly is the right way to apply unauthorized practice of law. So if you're fighting differently in Florida than you are in Chicago or in Illinois or between California, how does a company really keep up? How do they keep up with this? And then the other thing is it does not replicate the in-person experience. It's tough to do that. And I think there's a big challenge for companies to figure that out. And back to the point we mentioned earlier, is there's a con of building businesses, building the end-to-end experience, because right now, there are some companies that bring you in on Q&A, they provide you legal services with their branded network, they provide you documents, but do they provide you the end-to-end experience so you can go to a company like ours or other competitors and say, you know what, I'm going to go to X company and they'll take care of all my legal needs now and in the future. And that's the killer app. If you can figure that out, then you're going to be making a lot of money as a company. But that's a very challenging thing to do, to build the end-to-end experience for legal of all things. Is there any other things we missed in terms of some of the cons of building?
Also related to not replicating the in-person experience, do you feel like because of the internet, when someone asks a question, they'll have like a 24-hour delay in getting a response? Is that, how much does that hurt in terms of, is the customer still interested in the question that they asked? How often are they not interested in that, having that delay?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, because if you interact with a lawyer right now, and I had a really high-priced lawyer that was helping me with all my stuff, and if I got an answer in 24 hours, I was lucky. So the idea of actually having guarantees of 24-hour delivery for questions that maybe not as, and they're pressing, there are issues about divorce, or there are issues about family law, or about your vital intent issue. If you get it 24 hours, that's a pretty good standard. Now, of course, we'd like to do better, and all the companies would like to do better. But the idea of getting it that quickly is an improvement. Now, can we get to the point of doing it instantaneously, is maybe what you're talking about, or real chat, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just think like in Google, if I search something and I get the result 24 hours later, most of the times I wouldn't even be interested in that. But I guess that's not the case in legal questions.
Yeah, so I mean, there's always the idea. There are a lot of companies that actually have databases of Q&A which you can go to and get answers.
Yeah.
But if you're actually getting so-called bespoke, customized legal advice, 24 hours is pretty good. Hey, a lot of these companies, we can all do better.
Yeah.
But it's better than the alternative of interacting with the lawyer. That's, any other cons?
I think I have a comment here is
Sure.
in-person experience to your earlier Amazon example. They had a similar challenge when they launched their companies. How can you replicate shopping experience? So that's what they proved that, hey, online you can have the same fun shopping. I think that's what the challenge on the legal side as well is how can technology bridge the gap?
Are you saying how we can have fun in legal services? I like that. No, that's great. Absolutely. No, I see your point. It's definitely bridging that gap. And I think, again, back to your point is dead on. If we can replicate the in-person experience, then basically we've figured out a way to take out the hesitation of the user. Because the in-person experience implies a lot of things. You know, I'm talking to, Stanford graduate, Stanford graduate lawyer, someone who's gone to a great undergrad, someone who's basically practicing in a top law firm. Whatever the case may be, any one of you will be, in one of these experiences. You have that trust issue, you have the qualifications. But if we can do that all online and have the same level of interaction, then we've figured it out. All of us have figured it out. Any other cons? Sure.
Have you run into any issues with people not having access to internet, or because it strikes me, I know We the People was a precursor to some of your type of companies, but We the People had brick and mortar stores, which proved effective because people who needed these services would go into the stores and were able to access in-person people. And I'm just wondering if you've had any issues with people who you would target, maybe not being facile with the internet, maybe not having access to the internet, anything like that.
I mean, there's obviously, that's something that's obviously a concern, because the web is not penetrated everyone. But our biggest ally in this challenge is this thing right here. Because nowadays, I mean, if you study, it's very interesting. I mean, not just the U.S. If you take a look at Indian villages, and I did a lot of work in India before jumping in this place into this rate. And nowadays, in villages in India, people actually use cell phones to interact with one another. It's fascinating. Now, obviously, they may not use smartphones, but if you look at the penetration of cell phones, I think it may have surpassed actually the number of cell phones may soon surpass the number of individuals in the US. So we think the mobile device is actually a big equalizer that allows everyone access to the internet, even if you don't have, for example, DSL at home, or you don't have access to a computer or so on and so forth. So it's not perfect, and you're right, not everyone has access, but I think the technologies are only getting better to allow people more access to the internet, which helps us out. And our challenges for those people who are lower and middle income class, that may not have as much of a fluency in technology, is to make sure our flows are very intuitive.
So it's just so and that's kind of a little bit, you know, not taking sort of the perspective from an entrepreneurs now, but from an end user. I think one of the advantages of these transactions, legal transactions occurring more and more through the internet, is that you as a consumer then have much more easier access to your sort of all your legal obligations, your entire legal sphere surrounding it. Currently, you know, like I have, you know, a ton of documents that likely rest in some law offices, but that affect me and I have difficult access to that. Harm and I were talking about that the other day, and there seems to be a trend in general towards, you know, moving more and more control over these legal documents towards the consumer, you know, with the average Joe consumer or a company. I think that's one of the advantages, actually, just going back to your previous slide.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's actually happening with the internet. Sorry. No, that's a great point. The cloud, again, this turns back, you raised a really good point. It turns back the idea that we and a lot of these companies are really SaaS companies. We're software as a service companies, and we're cloud-based companies. And so not all of them are. I want to point out there, not everybody's on the cloud. But we happen to be one of the many companies that are on the cloud. And the idea of actually accessing everything you need on your phone, tablet, or laptop is something that we think everyone should have. Everyone should have access to, you know, there's various taglines. But the idea of legal advice at your fingertips, that's the idea that all of us in this industry want to make sure everyone has. And it's a challenge because it's not perfect yet. It's not perfect. We haven't gotten there yet. So moving on, I want to make sure we get to. So I want to do actually a quick demo, which is actually I haven't done this kind of demo before. But can everyone pop open their cell phones? And I hope you guys have smartphones. If you can jump onto the rocketlawyer.com site. You have an account?
Yeah,
Great.
I bought
Yeah.
one agreement once.
All right. Tell me when you guys are there. Is anyone not there yet? Okay, cool. All right, so can you just type in there? You can see what we do. I mean, that's the interface that a lot of users come to first when they go on rocketlawyer.com. You can create a document. If you tap in Ask a Lawyer, that's one of the tabs. Connect a Lawyer, that's on our site.
Do you guys have a mobile version?
So we're walking through.
I'm getting like a full-blown web page here.
So you're an Android.
What?
So are you an Android?
No, it's iPhone. It's not jailbroken. I haven't like
There you go.
lost stuff with it.
All you have to do is, when you connect to Lawyer, you'll see our mobile product.
Shouldn't that be automatic?
Sorry?
Shouldn't that be automatic?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that just threw me off. I was like,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I don't really know.
So the actual the Q&A is our one pretty much end-to-end mobile solution that we've introduced. So if you're on the Connect a Lawyer page right now, so go ahead and just ask any question. It could be a very simple question, but just think about it. So the idea here, to give you an idea, is that we figured out through our design that the best way for people to interact on our site is just to ask a question. So ask any question, and the tablet you can see is actually also optimized as well. I won't take you through the whole flow, but I'm just giving you an idea of what exactly the flow is like. All right. So you don't need to complete your question because we're not going to necessarily submit it, but you got kind of halfway through it, and go ahead and press the next obvious thing to do to get to the next experience, part of the experience. And you're going to be asking by email.
Do you do anything with the question, or is it just pulling me in?
I'm actually using this demo not to necessarily send 25 questions at once, but to show you the workflow.
But if I was an actual user?
Yep. Yeah, it would go straight through. It would go straight through. So if you actually are logged in right now and you submitted a question, your question would be submitted. So if you're logged in, you may want to ask a real question. All right, so you're at the next page. Is everyone at the next page? All right, so this is the idea of, again, simple but not too simple workflow. So what we figured out on the next page is that we want to make sure that we go ahead and enter in. You'll see that California is probably IP identified for everybody, right? The next stage is also, it also asks you, enter in your practice area, enter in, is it for me and my business, whatever the case may be.
You have a traffic practice area?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is that we've actually listed those practice areas based on volume. All right, so if you've selected your practice area, click again and move on to the next page.
Oh.
All right, so everyone down to the registration page. Uh-oh, what happened?
I never got past, so I have my question. Now, how do I get to the next page?
Oh, so you just press the CTA and ask the question. You're up.
Oh, I thought you didn't want me to submit.
So you can submit. If you actually submit, you won't actually get started.
Sorry, that's what
All
I
right.
was trying not to do.
So you submitted, you basically choose your practice areas. Everyone on the practice area page, the tagging page, then you press next, and then you guys see the question that's there. Now we're doing some A/B testing on the questions, so it may say for you email or password, or it may ask you what is the email address to which you want this sent to, and how do we protect the password. Is everyone on the same page? Are we on the same one?
Sign into your account.
Okay, so this again is just a practice. So therefore you can enter in any email address. It could be a totally fake email address, just whatever@whatever.com. So just do that. I just want to show you the experience. And then just put in any password that makes sense to you guys. All right, so you're on the last page, and is everyone at the payment page now? There you go. So that's why we're stopping here, because I'm not going to ask you guys to pay. But here you can see that we have. This is an idea of our business model. The idea is $39.95 for a subscription, and you get a 7-day free trial, or you pay $49.95, and you basically get it buy it now. You buy it for one question, and so you can only imagine which choice that a lot of users make. Right. So you see the flow. So this is our mobile is pretty much end-to-end a mobile experience. But you can imagine that anyone that's going through this experience, in a matter of just 4 minutes, 5 minutes, you've asked your question, you've identified if it's for my business or for me, you've identified your practice area, and you determine if I want to enter to a free trial and get an answer. If you don't want to pay for it, you cancel after 7 days. If you find value in what we provide, then you basically continue on a subscription. But that's our idea of democratizing the services. Making it that simple, not too simple, but simple enough to ask the question. And that's the challenge that every company has. How to make the workflow simple enough to intake questions, to intake information to create documents, to intake other things, to make it simple enough to bring them on. This is something that, we built it, we like it, but there's obviously ways to improve it. And other people do it better, worse. But this is one way that we've approached how to make it simple for folks.
What's the conversion at this point?
That's the $1 million question. And that's what I do. As a business lead, I track carefully. So every time you come onto that page, I track all the traffic on a daily basis. How many people get from page 1 to page 2, from page 2 to page 3, from page 3 to page 4. And I'm constantly using Optimizely as a very effective tool, if you're familiar with it. I'm constantly testing messaging. I'm testing the fields to see what exactly is the thing that's going to move you down the funnel. So, but that gives you an idea, a really quick snapshot of a product and how it's developed. The folks who are involved in this are designers who designed that mobile experience for you to be able to see it on the tablet or on the mobile experience. There's people who are UX designers that are thinking about where exactly should I put the CTA so you don't get confused as to how to get to the next page. There are front-end engineers making sure it looks pretty. but also make sure it's functional. Back-end engineers that make sure the data gets captured. But there's a team of about 10 people that basically built the product that you see right now. Not only that, but obviously you submit it, and the lawyers respond back, and then you get an answer, and you can ask follow-up questions. So
one thing that I found interesting is that many of these platforms, including LegalZoom, they actually have videos of lawyers on that introduce themselves, which I thought is interesting. So there seems to be a need to kind of personalize the experience so people see that there's real people, real lawyers working behind that website. And you know, it's also in terms of the kind of the look and feel, also on Rocket Lawyers, it's just a lot of real people and stories about real people, you know, Laura Grossman, Esquire, and putting faces to names, and this I think is an important.
It's the names very interestingly. Like we use even stock photos. Actually, we've tested over the course of time. Part of the testing is a video versus not a video.
Right.
Because sometimes videos distract people.
Right.
And people just we just say, I'm giving up after 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And so people tend to, and it's really interesting. You make the point about people. Is she looking straight at you? Is she looking at the box? Is she in the normal setting? We test all of that to see what exactly is the best way to represent a person to get trust in the system. There are a lot of things. If you looked at the first page, we figured out how it works. This is actually the most important thing to put here because it converts the most. If you took a look at the first page, we also had lawyers, like you were saying, lawyers, actually a scroll of lawyers. We had a map saying we cover, the U.S. We also had at the very bottom of it testimonials that were covered in New York Times and Forbes and all. So all of these things are all things that build trust in the user, and all we test very rapidly. But hopefully, I know you're familiar with this, but hopefully it gives you a taste of why this is a technology company. This is what we do. We try to figure out how to convert people and how to make sure that they have a great experience. So I think these are some of the things I'll point out. So where are the key priorities in terms of how do we build these products? And this has been borne out by some of the discussion we've had so far. When we think about building products, it's based on the customer user experience, like the experience you just had. If I had more time, I would ask you specifically what you liked and didn't like about the experience. What would make you convert? Data-driven. We've been talking a lot about data in this conversation. That data about what exactly are the things that lead to greater conversions basically affect the design. We use data also to determine what exactly are the products we're going to build in the future because there's a need for that product, like predicting what the next step is for a user. Design, making sure that the design is elegant, not only from a visual standpoint, but also from a UX standpoint, where the design actually makes sense. It's intuitive for you to know that you are supposed to, like in there, we actually didn't have to. We could have just left it blank, and you would have known to put your question in there, right? But that's part of the UX design, the CTA. Where does it sit? If we put the CTA, it was the box that basically takes you to the next page. If we put it in a non-obvious place, like in the bottom left corner, then you would know how to get to the next page. Domain expertise is relevant in our space because we know legal. And then the idea is also to think big in terms of how you're building a product. Don't make it so narrow and so niche that very few users use it. A lot of people can use the product. So I know we have 10 minutes left. So the question for you guys is, should we spend the last 10 minutes talking about the future of law in terms of what direction we need to go to, or things about maybe experiences of starting a company? All right, so the question is, how do people want to talk about, the choices are the future of law, the direction we think the law will go, or secondly, sharing some of my experiences of how you would start a company in this space. So let's go for the first one, the future of law. All right, Mike's, oh wow, this is close. Okay, so future of law again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, my experiences of building a company in this space. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right.
Let's do the short version of both.
Okay, so the short version of both. All right, that's good. All right, so I'll take it really quickly. So future of law. So this is part of actually a discussion that we're having over lunchtime. It was a great discussion about what exactly is the future of law. How do you envision law delivered in the future? So If you look at Google, what they're doing is that they have a Google Glass, a different way to visualize how you interact with the world, how do you interact with the internet. So are your products actually going to be in that time frame? It's not a mobile device, it's actually a small screen right in front of you. So can you actually have somebody nod their head and move about, however they do their next CTAs and get to the next page? Will you be able to build those type of products? And then if you think about the future too, that Nest is an example of getting in your home, of a product, and we talked about this. Google acquired Nest for many reasons. One of the reasons they acquired Nest, which is the internet-based sort of thermostat, is because that was a product that was in the home. And so as these companies continue to build more and more products that actually are home-based and start to penetrate your life in the home, can we, in the legal tech space, develop products that also are an integral part of your home experience? If we think about Apple, now they've done a great job of building the iPad and Air and phone. So they've basically revolutionized with the iPhone the way you interact with the phone, and also Air, the way you interact with these tablet devices. Are your products going to be ready for that? If you develop these products, so that's the reason why I showed you our Q&A, because we want to make sure we're part of that future, where people interact on tablets and also mobile devices. And it's not just us at Rocket Lord. A lot of companies are trying to do this. But what's the next thing that Apple's going to build? I don't know. But whatever that is, we want to make sure we're part of it. And I'm not sure we can be on the watch. But, you know.
You're thinking about the glass, for example?
Well, we want to make sure we're part of that.
Yeah.
That's something that Google is one of our key investors. And so we want to make sure that we help them develop the future too in terms of their law. And we're their only investment in the legal space. So I think we may have one other one. Because Rick Claw, he's the guy. He was at a presentation at the ABA Tech. And he mentioned 2 companies, so not including Lawfit. So what are the disruptors? So these are things you got to think about. What are the things that are going to fundamentally change how you build these companies in the future? One thing is automated document assembly. That these document assembly companies are going to be more and more sophisticated and figure out, based on more knowledge about you, as to what exactly they should be asking you. They won't be just simple forms that everyone is going to be asking the same questions on. It may be based on your background. They bring in something about your LinkedIn profile. They may have some information about you based on the information provided to the service provider like Rocket Lord. Relentless connectivity. The idea that nowadays everyone is connected by phone, by tablet, so therefore the expectation is, and that's a very, very key question that you asked, is 24 hours enough? I mean, if you didn't have a phone and you didn't have a tablet, would you ask that question? No. So that's the idea. We're living in a world where basically people are used to getting answers instantaneously. And are you ready for that in your technology? Legal marketplaces, soon enough, we got to figure out ways to create marketplaces where you find lawyers not only for documents and for Q&A, but for litigation matters, for basically M&A negotiations. We got to figure out ways to create marketplaces for that in the same way that companies like Odesk have in the freelance space. And they merged, so Elance and Odesk are actually the same company. So they've figured out some of these issues that I think the legal space hasn't yet figured out. Embedded legal technology. So, down the line, this is a little bit futuristic, but the idea is that what if there were chips that actually had your knowledge and you stored those chips, and that was your way of interacting with the internet or any other medium that provides information? Are we part of that future? Well, we're part of that chip, we're part of that. We are a so-called app in your embedded technology. AI, intelligent legal services, back to the idea of predictive learning, that can we actually predict not only what you want now, but can we predict what you actually want 2 months down the line, 6 months down the line, and serve that to you based on the knowledge we have. Last part is big data. And we're collecting, again, we're all data companies. So if we have this data, then can we predict what you want?
So I think we touched on that a little bit, but do you or have you thought about that? So you must have, if you have subscription users, some type of model of their behavior and how it develops over time. Someone comes to you for incorporation, but shortly after that, and on some regular schedule, they wind up seeking out these 2 other services. Do you do something like once you sign up for incorporation, 2 months later, we just drop you a little email that says, hey, here's another service we think you might need?
So I think some part of it's manual, some part of it's intelligent. So therefore, I think there's a hybrid of that. We're doing maybe more manual than we are intelligent. So I think the goal is to start to get away from figuring out and looking at databases to figure out when we should be sending emails to automating that. And also not only providing 2 months from down the line, everyone receives the same email. We're getting more data about the user and customizing that email. So we're going down that path, but it's not your Watson, or it's not the most sophisticated. But I think that's an area of great growth, I think, for us, and also other companies in the space. So I'm going to skip a couple of these slides. This one we talked about, the idea of one-to-one consultative is moving to one-to-many package. And this is something that Richard Susskind talked about in '96. So he said 20 years from then, so that means 2016. Are we there? I mean, we're pretty close. So I think the idea, for the role of lawyers, as you think about your future, as you think about what you do, you may think that you may be a big law firm attorney, you may be in-house counsel at a Google or Apple, or some other company. But I think you have to start to rethink the traditional models of the business models, the delivery methods, and the role of attorney-client relationship, because the earth is shifting underneath you as we speak. When I was at Apple, we were actually interacting with lawyers in a very different way than we were even 10 years before that. And so that will continue to happen at all these in-house counsels. And also, when you think about big law firms, you know better than I do all the press about what's happening in the legal industry, about the consolidation, about law firms that are disappearing. So therefore, the landscape of big law firms will fundamentally change. Some for the better. Some firms will get even stronger. But that may not be the path that you want to take. And so if you're going to think about how you progress in your career, you got to think about how are you going to adapt to this new environment where this just doesn't affect consumers and small businesses. This affects you as lawyers, as how you interact with them, and eventually down the line, even the large companies that these big law firms actually service. And then the idea is, when you think about being a lawyer, you're not learning things like negotiation and being a better negotiator, a better advocate, or being better at drafting agreements, or better at doing the tasks of being a lawyer. I think the thing is, you have to step back and think about, as lawyers, are you delivering knowledge and expertise the clients lack? And that's something that Susskind talked about, that your job is not necessarily to do the tasks. It's not necessarily to use the same tools that you use today, but figure out ways to deliver that value and deliver that knowledge to your client base. And that future medium may be very different. I mean, if you think about even 10 years down the line, people never use the cloud. Nowadays, and people use paper-based services. Nowadays, I rarely look at anything but on my computer. I rarely print everything out. And soon enough, legal documents, I'm not sure if I'll be looking at them. There may be summaries of these documents. So be ready for that. Don't think about the tools that you learn on a day-to-day basis. You're in law school, being here in another 10 years. And this is only just a suggestion to think about when your practice fundamentally differently than what you have before. So now I've done my abridged version of that. I have a few minutes left for So when we think about, I think when we think about being an entrepreneur, and if you want to stick around a little later, I can continue talking unless we have another class coming in. I don't know.
Maybe we should end on time, but maybe people want to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I took a very interesting leap. So just a quick background of my story. So I was actually, I had the great fortune to be at Apple, and I had the ability to actually be the lead mergers and acquisitions attorney for Apple, which was an amazing experience, working with the senior VPs and the VPs at Apple on strategic deals there. And my background was that I essentially gave all of that up to basically walk away from that job to start working in my house with 4 engineers with no pay for a year. In fact, I was paying out of my pocket to build this company. And at the time in 2009, as Professor Vogl mentioned, there were very few companies that were getting funded in this space. So it was a very precarious sort of proposition to leave a company like that. So the one thing that you have to think, if you are going to be an entrepreneur and thinking about being an entrepreneur in the legal tech space or otherwise, is that there better be some incredible passion that you have about being in the space. I mean, this quote from Steve Jobs talks about the idea that, the reason is because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person will give up. It's really hard. You have to do it over a sustained period of time. And if you look at the people who are successful in the eyes of society, it's the one that persevered. So when you think about starting a company, if you are going to start a company in this space or otherwise, the biggest thing you have to have is real passion for doing this. Because there was no guarantee I would get funding. There was no guarantee I'd get acquired. There was no guarantee of anything. In fact, a year after sitting in that house with 5 people in my room and having to ask my wife to shift around because we were taking over the house, literally there were 3 engineers that were going to walk out because they told me, listen, Jay, I can't do this for free anymore. You got to bring the funding. And my founder and I were looking at each other going, you know what? This is the most stressful time in my life. And if I don't get funding, or my co-founder doesn't get funding in the next 2 weeks, it's over. The whole year of my life of developing a product is over. Now, that story could happen to you if you're an entrepreneur, and it could be that it's over, and you have to be ready for that. I mean, I know Professor Vogl and I would talk about the struggles of being an entrepreneur, but you have to be ready for those lows as an entrepreneur, and have enough passion in your belly to know that I want to persevere and actually build something, in spite of the fact that 95% of the probability is that I will fail. It just so happens we got funding. And we got funding by a few folks, Google and a few other folks. So it worked out for me. But I think the idea is that if you want to build a company, you have to be ready. The one thing that was really interesting is the whole idea that everyone has a story. I started my company with my co-founder in a Starbucks, which is maybe typical. And I read this book, Art of the Start, by Guy Kawasaki, which I thought was a great book, especially as a novice entrepreneur. So if you're thinking about it, you might as well, you might want to pick up that book. And I want to point out 3 things, and maybe end with that at the end of this this session here, is that when you think about a company that you're looking to build, if you are going to be an entrepreneur, the 3 most important things that every investor, everyone will ask you is that do you have a big enough market? Do you have the right team? And do you have the right product that's addressing that? Now, one thing is actually a condition precedent to the other 2. Can anyone tell me which one is the necessary thing? Oh, market. It's market. Because you can have a brilliant team, and you can have a great product, but if there's only 1,000 people using it, there's no point. So in every pitch, make sure you're attacking a market that's big enough. And obviously, when you have that market, make sure you hire the best people or work with the best people, people you trust. One thing that I actually really valued in starting a company, and this is the reason why I work with the people I worked with, is that I wanted to be with people with great integrity, people who I thought were honest, people who were very team-oriented, and people who thought big. And notice in that list of 4, that I didn't mention how smart they were, what schools they went to. I didn't mention any of that because for you as a co-founder, you have to make sure that you sit with that person day and night, working with them at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the morning, and you feel like you can trust that person with everything. Because you'll be spending more time with them than your loved one. Fact of the matter. I mean, I love my co-founders because, and my wife and his wife were like, they're jealous of us because we were spending so much time together. He would get calls from me at 10 p.m. and his wife would go, oh no, it's Jay. But that's the level of trust that you need with the team that you have. And turning to product. The ideas of product, you have to build the right product for your company, but the idea of product market fit is really key. So when you've actually built a product, you have to make sure that product actually fits that market and is something that people actually want in that market. Otherwise, you're basically chasing a product that no one will use and is something that is not really useful to your goals. So I think I wanted to end off with those 3 tenets of a successful business. I have plenty more advice, and I can, of course, share my email address with Professor Vogl and Professor Genesereth. And I apologize, I'm solving your last name. Prof G. Prof G. But if you have any other aspirations to go down the path of actually being an entrepreneur, then I'd be happy to share my experiences because it's been a few wars that I've been through to get to the point I'm at. And with that, thank you again for this opportunity for
Okay, so we have a change in schedule for next week. So next week we'll have Professor